Victoria and Chris, would you like an update from the Newscast Tory leadership ice cream news desk? You may not know what that is, Victoria, if you've not been listening to every single episode we've done.
Go on.
We've been asking each of the contenders in the Tory leadership contest, their teams, what ice cream their candidate most identifies with.
Why? I mean, I know it's hot, but why?
Because it's hot. You hit the nail on the head. So the first answer came from Nadine Zahawi. Mm-hmm. His team said he was a Zoom because his record of delivery is out of this world. He's now out of this contest.
Yeah, it clearly helped him. Yeah.
Tom Tugendhat's team said he likes all ice creams, but they shared an anecdote of him being mistaken for someone called Häagen-Dazs when he was at Sandhurst. Such a Tom Tugendhat story. Today, we can add to the list Suella Braverman, someone else who's also left the contest. Her team said she's a frozen yogurt, not an ice cream, because she's stubborn.
I don't understand that.
No, I don't.
I have to say I didn't quite get it either. I think maybe it's something to do about the consistency of frozen yogurt versus ice cream.
It doesn't.
No, it's rock hard.
Yeah,
rock hard, maybe.
Yeah.
That's the sort of thing we will be grappling with in this episode of Newscast. No, I promise it's not. We'll be doing the actual news.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
Hello, it's Victoria in the studio.
And Chris in the studio.
And one of the other things we've been doing on Newscast this week for the Tory leadership contest is getting big BBC brands and smashing them into the Tory leadership contest. And that is how we've explained the results. So today, please listen to John Briggs, who you may recognise as the voice of The Weakest Link.
After the second round of voting, Rishi Sunak has banked the most. As the former Chancellor, he would, wouldn't he? He has 101 votes, making him the strongest link. According to the bookies, Penny Mordaunt is the favourite to win despite trailing on 83 votes. Her initials are already PM, but will the Conservative Party agree? Liz Truss looked a little lost at her launch this morning, but she's ploughing forwards with 64 votes. As part of her bid, Kemi Badenoch has taken aim at the online safety bill. But is she playing a dangerous game with just 49 MPs behind her? The statistics reveal Tom Tugendhat scraped through with 32 votes. Is his game almost over? Attorney General Suella Braverman may feel she didn't get a fair hearing from her colleagues, who gave her just 27 votes, making her the weakest link.
Suella Braverman, you are the weakest link. Goodbye. Oh, it seemed quite harsh saying that. Chris, Liz Truss launched her campaign today. What was it like?
So it was the final of the big launches after Rishi Sunak a couple of days ago, Penny Mordaunt yesterday. I don't know if it was because I've been to launches every day of the week, but it seemed to have a bit less zip than the other two. And also because of where she had decided, or the timing of her launch, we could put to her, well, you came third yesterday. And of course, she's still third after today, whereas the others were spared that. So there was more scrutiny for her from the outset. Clearly, the challenge she's got now, having had 2 rounds of voting and come third on both occasions, and the gap has widened to Penny Mordaunt, is can she make the case that she should get the kind of second golden ticket? Because the assumption is Rishi Sunak will be one of the two that goes to the membership. Who will be the other one? Their argument, Team Truss, they think they've got a bit more. They think that the natural, as it was put to me, their natural ceiling of support within the parliamentary party, they argue, maybe they would say this, wouldn't they, is higher than Penny Mordaunt's when we see the redistribution of all the other votes that you'll get to when you've got a battle between 3. Because that's the point that it matters to actually claim that second place ticket. Penny Mordaunt's team making the argument that they're the proper clean start. You know, and clearly she's got a story to tell about who on earth she is, because nobody outside of Westminster really knows that, other than in Portsmouth, where she has a seat.
And viewers of Splash, that diving show.
Well, indeed. But equally, if you want to make the argument about a clean break, well, you know, she's the leading of the front runners candidate to be able to do that. So now we've got the weekend and the TV debates. Big moment, because you can crash and burn in TV debates and you can also shine. And then the next round coming on Monday and then potentially Tuesday and Wednesday.
And if you were watching Liz Truss launching her campaign on Thursday morning on TV, you'd see the amazing sight of her not knowing how to get out of the room. And then an aide having to sort of yank her back. She had to then just do a bit of a U-turn. So her first U-turn of the campaign, just getting out of her own launch.
It is. I was talking to David Davis yesterday, former candidate for the Tory leadership, Ian Duncan Smith, who became Conservative leader, who both said the whole business, and as it should be, but the whole business of running to be party leader, running to be Prime Minister is flipping scary. And little things like that, you know, you finish your speech, you walk with purpose and direction off stage, and then, oh, actually,
Where is the door?
where is the door? Yeah. There'll be plenty more of those moments to come.
Right, let's talk about how all this is going with our guest on today's episode. It's Matt Hancock, former Health Secretary.
Great to be here. Hello.
And backer of Rishi Sunak.
Yes, backer of Rishi Sunak.
When did you take on that moniker? Is it when he signed up for his website in December last year?
No, after Boris resigned, it was obvious.
So it's definitely after.
We needed to make a choice. And there were 11 runners at that point, and I looked at all the runners. I know them all well. And actually, what happened was I was on the phone to Gina, and she said, "Who would be the best prime minister?" I said, "Rishi Sunak." She said, "Well, you better back him then." And because I just said it without blinking, and I've worked with them all. I think all 5 who are in would make an excellent prime minister. But I think Rishi is the best for the job, and I've worked incredibly closely with him, especially during the pandemic. And he's got what it takes.
What do you make of the fact that the sort of early skirmishes of this campaign have been pretty much all the candidates gunning directly for him and gunning for him on tax and describing him as a socialist, describing him effectively as a Labour chancellor? It's quite something.
Well, it's a small number of voices. I've actually found inside the parliamentary party, this has been a really positive campaign. I mean, I know that's not what it looks like in the media. I get that. But what happens in the media is, a couple of negative noises, and that absolutely flies. Amongst the 360 of us, everybody's being really nice to each other, not least because if somebody's candidate drops out, you want to try to get them onto your side. So everybody's it's been a really, really cheerful and pleasant week inside the parliamentary party. And then you walk out of the tea room or you go to the newspaper stand and it looks completely different.
I thought there were like smears going backwards and forwards on WhatsApp.
I have literally seen absolutely none of that, none at all.
You must have heard what Lord Frost said about Penny.
Of course,
Morgan
no.
this morning.
I've seen. I read the media, and I saw what Lord Frost said. And but what I'm telling you about, what I'm saying is that within the body of the Kirk, within the 360 of us who make the decision on the final 2.
Rishi Sunak is making a big thing about how he's got a plan to get the country through the next difficult few months and potential years with high inflation and the cost of living. What actually is that plan?
Oh, well, the plan is really clear, right? The first thing is we've got to get inflation down.
How?
The number one way to tackle that, number one, is don't make it worse, right? Because if you loosen fiscal policy at a time of high inflation, that risks making it worse.
Tax cuts, you mean by that?
Well, whether it were tax cuts or spending increases, obviously the big debate is on tax cuts. And so you have to be careful not to make it worse. You've got to get inflation down.
How do you get inflation down?
Well, the first thing is you don't make it worse. The second thing is a big contributor to inflation is energy price rises. We have seen the oil price come down off its highs, and that hasn't yet come through to petrol prices. But I hope that it will. And then,
but how can he get energy prices down? I mean, he can't.
No, I'm saying that is happening. And then the second thing to stop inflation is making sure that through monetary policy, which obviously isn't the preserve of the next prime minister, because they all believe in independence of the Bank of England, or at least I hope. I haven't even asked. It's sort of self-evident that they should. Is making sure that monetary policy does its work, and that is not easy because
interest rates.
So Rishi Sunak can't get inflation down.
Yes, he can.
But you haven't explained how.
Yes, I have. I've explained firstly that energy prices have already come down off their peaks. That should ensure that inflation comes down a bit. But the critical thing is that a one-off increase in prices leads to inflation for a year. What we must avoid is that getting embedded. Right, and that comes down to what is the response of wages, and we've got a whole series of debates about public sector pay. Making sure that we don't end up in a cycle where you end up putting up, wages go up, and then you have higher prices, and that is what happened 30, 40 years ago. There's no policymakers now who were there at the time. But what we must do is learn from our history.
Did you get a call last week, by the way, from Boris Johnson asking you to come back?
I didn't.
And have you discussed with Rishi Sunak when he decided he wanted to resign? Or is that not the sort of conversation you've had with him?
No, I didn't. I haven't talked to him about that. And I haven't talked to him about jobs either. I know it might sound really boring. I just thought, who's going to be the best prime minister? And then I thought I'll just go and back them.
You must
I
be
mean,
able
call
to,
me makes me sound quite old-fashioned.
you must be able to offer him useful advice, though, because you've been around
Yeah, I've run.
politics
Yeah.
exactly for longer than him. And what about him as a communicator?
Yeah.
Is he a bit, his critics will say he's a bit wooden. He doesn't get across his sort of humanness enough. Does he need to loosen up?
Oh, I think he's pretty charismatic.
Do we hear that? Do
Well,
we see
yeah,
that?
if you look at that campaign video that they put together in 24 hours or whatever it was.
It wasn't.
It
funny.
was.
You don't believe
I
that.
do.
I
do.
You're an expert in tech. There's no way
No,
that was done.
I tell you, Victoria, why I believe it. It's because if you look at the shots of Rishi in it, it's all with a black backdrop. They shot it in a hotel room with a black backdrop. That's easy to do in a couple of hours, and all the rest is B-roll. And of course, they'd been picking up a load of shots of Rishi meeting people and doing various things to have on the laptop ready to go, and a combination of shooting somebody
Ready to
doing
go
a
for
sort
what?
of. To promote the work he was doing in the Treasury, I'm sure. Just in case it was needed. But but the video itself was put together in 24 hours.
You know that for a fact.
I do. Yeah. And but the point I was making is in that video, right? He talks about his upbringing. He was born in a pharmacy in Southampton, born into a family who ran a pharmacy in Southampton. I don't think he was actually born in the pharmacy, although his dad was an NHS GP, so I'm sure it would have been helpful to have him on hand. But he's and when he talks about his background, his upbringing, the values he learnt from his parents. I think it's very powerful. He's a story of a young lad come good.
But in his recent record, he is a tax-raising, COVID law-breaking politician.
Yeah, he did get fined, yeah.
Well, you've seen the pictures of him for which he was fined.
It doesn't
He didn't
matter.
want to be at that party. He
was-
turned up 5
It doesn't
minutes
matter.
early.
He was fined. He has broken the law.
He's apologised for that.
So
But
that's okay.
But nobody thinks that Rishi is anything other than a man of great integrity, right? Even those who disagree with his policy in this campaign, nobody's challenging his integrity.
Okay, well, on that then, why did he stick with the Prime Minister as long as he did? Through Wallpapergate, through Partygate, through a bit of the Chris Pincher affair?
Because he's a team player.
Well,
He's a team player. And actually, Sajid talked about this as well when he resigned. He talked about struggling with the balance of being a team player in a very, we're having this debate in Westminster. There's still a very grave situation out in the country for people trying to make ends meet. He's the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He struggled with that duty against what he felt he needed to do. And also remember, for those of us who have been through this extraordinary period in government through the pandemic, you do become close to the people you work with. It's notable, for instance, that Dom Raab is also backing Rishi. Dom Raab,
Deputy Prime Minister.
Rishi, Boris. We worked so closely together during that period. And we're human. You have affection. I have great affection for Boris Johnson.
But you must have argued with Rishi Sunak quite a lot because he was always the one saying, "Oh, let's open up the economy quicker," and you were always portrayed as the one saying, "Let's be a bit more cautious." Here.
And
is that how it panned out around the table?
At times, not all the time. There were times when we agreed with each other. There were times when we put different proposals forward. But I'll tell you this: I always had respect for the integrity with which he put his argument. He said what he believed to be the best answer to the situation. I said what I believe. And then Boris made the call. And sometimes Boris sided with me on balance, and sometimes he sided with Rishi on balance. But I come back to this point about integrity. And in fact, and I've said this to Rishi, it's not when you back somebody to be Prime Minister and you are you're an MP and part of the team, you need to back somebody who not only you agree with, obviously, in the large part, direction, strategy, approach to life. But you also need to be able to trust them that when you disagree, that they've taken your point of view into account.
Yeah, they've listened.
They've thought about things essentially from broadly the same value set. And then even if they come out with a different decision, you respect the decision because you respect the person. And that was true during the COVID times. And it's why both Rishi and I feel very strongly about this idea of collective responsibility. There are some things I know he argued against, but he feels a sense of collective responsibility to continue to explain why he supported them in public. And you have to do. People might say, "Well, that's funny." You can't run a government without that collective responsibility.
What about the argument that says, given what's happened and this colossal loss of belief in Boris Johnson from you guys as Conservative MPs, and opinion polls would suggest in the country as well, that the proper way to renew in office is a clean slate, that you go from someone like a Penny Mordaunt, who's not really widely known, would be the most unknown Prime Minister on assuming office in our lifetimes probably, but would be undeniably a completely clean slate, whereas your guy was stood there right alongside Boris Johnson, was fined, as Victoria mentions, and is kind of part of the previous administration, not a clean start at all.
So the reason that Boris Johnson left office was not down to a policy dispute, right?
No.
It wasn't like when Theresa May left office. It was not down to that. And while Rishi is, obviously delivered a whole load of the Boris Johnson agenda as his Chancellor, he is a very different character. And my view is that we can have that renewal in office, if you like, with Rishi Sunak. We would undoubtedly have it with any of the candidates,
from 11 to 10.
but a very different character. And you really do need to have been in a high office to be Prime Minister.
Can I ask what it's like running leader and Prime Minister?
Yeah,
You did it last time.
I did.
What did you think?
I absolutely loved running. This time I've
Did you?
loved the sort of being able to observe it with a bit of
distance,
a bit of perspective.
Did your phone go bonkers, by the way, before you decided to back Rishi? Was your phone going bonkers with all sorts of people saying, "Oh, Matt, would you join us?"
I thought you were going to say, "Oh, Matt, would you run?" And I was
Well,
thinking, how gently am I going to let you down, Chris? I did have a couple of people, but no, that wasn't going to happen. No.
Why did you love it? You said you loved
I absolutely loved it. I tell you, number one thing is that when you're in office, you abide by this collective responsibility we're talking about, and suddenly it all falls away. Now, at the same time,
meaning you can say what
exactly
you really think,
what you think,
Wow.
and more importantly, you have to dig deep into what you really believe and ask yourself and sort of try to peel back, because for years you've been saying X on a particular issue and actually quite quickly coming to the conclusion that you want to say something different. You have to dig deep and say, what do I really think is the best thing for the country in answer to this question? For instance, one of the things I enjoyed most is I gave a foreign policy speech. I've never been in a foreign policy job in government, so I'd literally never given a speech on foreign policy, but I've got views on it and I've observed it very closely and I've had significant international work, but not foreign policy.
The way you've just described that is so interesting, and I think it will confirm for those people who say politicians never tell us what they really think. They're not honest. They're not straight. And you've just confirmed that. If you could only say what you always only really think, people might respect that.
Well, there is a question, isn't there, as to whether the concept of collective responsibility
is a good idea or not.
And the extent to which it works, especially in such a disaggregated world of communications and media. In a world when there was basically, the BBC and the big newspapers, and so there were maybe 8 different ways of communicating with the public. It is a different question to when there is literally as many ways of communicating with the public as there are members of the public.
Yeah, you could call it institutional dishonesty, I think, can you, as well as collective responsibility. But let's move on from that to can we talk about your old brief?
But hold on, I'm just going to one little defence of collective responsibility.
I know why
it's very hard to see how the government.
Oh yeah, no,
I know.
We have got to run the country.
Of course, and also the media has a responsibility, because as soon as you know, there are any differences, we go, splits in the cabinet. We could look at ourselves as well.
And what people tend to do if they really disagree with something is go silent. And if you really disagree with it, then you resign.
Yeah.
Can we ask you about your old brief in the Department of Health? I mean, there are lots of kind of indicators on the NHS dashboard that seem to be flashing, whether it's ambulance waiting times, COVID admissions. I mean, are you actually quite worried about the state of the NHS tonight?
Well, I think there is some big challenges. There's obviously this backlog, which grew up not just because of operations that were cancelled, but because then people didn't come forward for with a problem with lumps and bumps, and we actually put quite a lot of effort in during the pandemic to say please still come forward if you need to, but the number of appointments that didn't happen during the pandemic is very significant, very big, and I know this is a huge focus of Sajid's when he was in post, so there is very significant pressure. Yeah, and I mean, there's also more people in the NHS than ever before. My view is it will only be solved by the full embrace of the use of technology to make things more efficient. And, we showed that in the pandemic at times. How long did you wait for
but people are waiting for 10 hours in an ambulance now.
I know.
And when's the technology going to come in to fix that? Tomorrow?
No. It needs to be done. It's the long term, it is the only sustainable solution. When you went to get your vaccine, how long did you wait?
Hardly at all.
Hardly at all.
Yeah.
Why? Because we put in the data backbone, essentially, to underpin who was called at what moment. And we put that in first and built the systems on top of it. Whereas the NHS exists and they're trying to put the data systems in underneath it. And it's a very difficult job.
That's the job of a generation, though, isn't it?
Yeah, not if you're lying in the back of an ambulance outside a hospital tonight because you can't get in and you have to wait there for another 10 hours. It doesn't matter how quick your vaccine is.
Yeah, I get that. But we've got a record number of nurses in the NHS. In 2019, I said 50,000 more nurses. They're 30,000 up. They're 3/5 of the way through.
Where is it relative to 2010 when you came into office?
It's higher. It's higher. It's a record number of doctors as well. So it isn't. Of course, we need more people, and the government are hiring more people. But what I'm trying to emphasise is that it's not just about throwing more people at the problem. It's about having the system work more efficiently. And we've shown it can be done, but it's incredibly hard.
Okay. The 40 new hospitals in England, which are now, the word new is being questioned by a lot of people, including
the word 40.
Yeah, by the National Audit Office and people. I mean, are you completely happy with how you described that programme?
Yes. So let me give you one example, right?
No, before you do, it wasn't 40 new hospitals.
Yes, it is.
It wasn't.
Yes, because if
that could be defined as a new wing or a refurbished hospital. They weren't 40.
Hold on, if you take my local example, the West Suffolk Hospital, it's built with an architecture that means it is in urgent need of updating. And there will be a new hospital in West Suffolk. Now that replaces the one that is that needs replacing. It's still a new hospital.
Are they knocking down the old one?
They effectively will have to knock down the old one.
Right.
So once they've built the
that's
new one.
Let's go through the 39 others.
The word new being the operative
fine.
one.
So that is obviously a new
hospital.
That one
Yes.
example.
Yeah. And let me give you another example.
We're not going to go through all.
Well, I know them all. I know them inside out. But the Cambridge Cancer Hospital, right? You might say, well, that's only a wing of Addenbrooke's. It's not a wing of Addenbrooke's. It's a new cancer hospital in Cambridge. So, yeah, the 40 new hospitals.
All of them properly new, like with a new sign on a new bit of land that wasn't there before.
Even the Department of Health released guidance last year saying the new could mean a new hospital, like your one.
Yeah.
It could mean a new wing. It could simply mean a bit of upgrading.
No, that
is true.
A bit of upgrading,
no, that is true. They released that in August after you'd left, August last year.
40 new hospitals.
One last thing. I mean, you, like all of us, must have been obsessed about every little twist and turn of COVID and every little change of the genome. Do you still kind of keep an eye on what's happening with the virus?
Yes.
Or have you just
Yeah, and I stay in touch with some of the clinicians who I work very closely with. And I'm pretty... well, at the moment, it's endemic. It would essentially have to be a new disease for us to be back into pandemic territory. And you can never rule out a new disease. And in fact, there will be more in our lifetimes. That's for sure. But it is endemic, not pandemic. And I'm really, actually, this country's learnt to live with it in a way that some others haven't. And one of the debates we had was, can you get to zero COVID? And China is demonstrating you cannot get to zero COVID. Yeah.
And I've got to ask, are you confident that the inquiry will get all the stuff that it needs? I mean, have you kept all your WhatsApps Or
Yeah, in fact, I've handed everything over to the department, and I did that.
even like your
months
your
ago.
WhatsApps on your private
The
personal
whole thing,
phone?
the whole thing, because I feel very strongly about the inquiry. That it's really, really important that we get to the lessons for how the person who's in my hot seat, if you like, next time, needs to have the book on the shelf that is is lessons learned from COVID-19, right? Because it was bloody hard because we didn't have a pandemic plan that stood up to what we needed, and we didn't have any data about this disease, and so we had to make decisions as we learnt about things, and that was really challenging. So it's really important.
Have you ever considered if your COVID rule breaking contributed in any way to Boris Johnson's downfall?
Oh, I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so. I mean, I resigned, and the question is different when it comes to a prime minister because there's so many other things like the war, for instance. I wasn't corralling the West to stand up to an evil, aggressive killer.
And just looking back on the handling of COVID, is there anything that you regret or you think you got?
Oh my God! Well, that's for a whole new newscast. I mean, yes, obviously,
Yeah.
Endless, because when you're making big decisions, you hope that you get the vast majority of them right. No human being gets all the decisions right, and what you need to do is constantly update them. And we were often accused of U-turns, but often it was, well, we made this decision because we thought it was the best call in the circumstances. Either the way it panned out was not accurate, or we didn't, or we've got new information. I've talked before about how the rules as they were interpreted around funerals was that sometimes parents didn't go to their child's funeral. That was not what we intended. And I massively regret that we got the way that those rules panned out on the ground was not what was intended and terrible. And we changed it. And then there was a whole load of the science as well, this question of asymptomatic transmission that I've talked about a lot before. Here's another one. The scientific advice at the start was that tests don't work if you haven't got symptoms, so you shouldn't test people who don't have symptoms. Well, turns out that wasn't true in this case, but it had been true for all previous coronaviruses. So I'm not blaming the scientists. Yeah. Science is about learning more as you understand more. So it's a sort of it's normal. Ironically, come back to collective responsibility. It's normal in politics to say no, I got everything right. Of course, I defend every little bit of what the government has done. Of course. You learn.
And finally, we've been asking all the leadership contenders what ice cream they identify with the most. Like,
I'm
if
not
they
a
were an ice
leadership
cream
contender.
No, I know.
Can I get out of it that way?
But you are a professional politician.
Yeah.
Nadeem Zahawi said he was a Zoom because he's like his delivery's out of this world or something.
What ice cream flavour?
Yeah. Do you identify? So it's not what's your favourite. It's more integral than that.
Salted caramel. Because there's two sides to every story.
Matt Hancock, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers, Matt.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. Thank you very much for listening.
You might expect me to mention Ukrainecast. Please do download Ukrainecast. It's there 3 times a week.
From all of us, talk to you soon. Bye.
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 Newscast from the BBC.